Hello and welcome to my first tutorial on Kerbal Space Program 0.21, and today we're going to learn how to get into orbit and some basic flight controls. The point of these tutorials is to teach you how to fly rockets as well as build them, and in the next episode we'll be building rockets. Now as you're loading in, you'll see you got 3 Kerbals here, and it'll have some funny sayings up here. Recruiting Kerbals, or clearing debris off launch pad, or treating Kessler syndrome, stuff like that. And now we're going to load in, and you should hear this music. First thing we're going to do is go through your settings, because that's probably what you want to change first. And I'll show you what my settings are at. This is just recommendations. First thing you'll notice is I have the max persistent breeze set to the default 250. Should be the same for you. If you don't want any debris, you can probably just turn it down. You can just turn it down later. So another thing you want to do is take your max physics delta time per frame and take it all the way to the right. You'll see mine's at 0.00, and I'll explain how to get to that number in a later tutorial. But for right now, the lowest setting you can go to is 0.03. So input should be fine. In graphics, so depending on what computer you're running on, you may want to, if you're running on an older computer, you'll probably want to uncheck the terrain scatters and lower the terrain detail to default and the render quality to good or simple. You can always come back and change these. In fact, some of them are changeable while you're in the middle of gameplay. Fallback part shaders you can set to true or false. I haven't really noticed a difference. And texture quality is another thing you can do if you're having performance issues. I always have VSync off personally. Unless you have a really good computer, I don't see why you should have it. And normally I believe the frame limit is set to 120. I just set it to default. It has to render less frames and just seems to provide for nicer gameplay. The light count and shadow cascades also vary by your performance, but for right now you should put them somewhere around 8 and 8 or 16 and 16 for both of them, and you can always come back and do that. Sound levels, I usually turn the spacecraft down, the music down, and the UI down somewhat. The ambience and voices, not really. So you'll want to accept. I'm not going to, and that should bring you back to the main menu. So these things are credits, and these will take you to websites right here. So you don't want to click on any of those. So we want to click Start Game. So you probably won't have Resume Saved as an option. You may wish to consider trying to use some of these tutorials for training. They have Construction Basics, Flight Basics, Orbiting 101 to the Moon Part 1. So those might be good for you, but I'm going to try and cover those without the tutorials. And then there are these challenges, which even experienced players sometimes have problems with. This one's easy. This one's a little hard. And some of these are really hard. So we're going to start new. And normally you'll have default. And you can type in whatever name you want. So I'm just going to set it as new game. You'll notice that you can't check the career box. And that's because the game's still in alpha. And they're still doing most of the back-end stuff for career mode. And right now, Sandbox is the only option. So you can also change your default flag when you go to other planets or in the spaceplane hangar and vehicle assembly building, which I'll show you in a minute. These are displayed, and so you can plant a flag on planets, and this will be your default flag for planting. So I'm going to pick the retro because I like retro. So you can also create your own bitmap of flags. Actually, I think it's a PNG file. But so we're going to start. And that might be in a later tutorial. Okay, I have to write all this down. So coming in right here, you can hear the bird noises, and that's great. We have the following. We have the spaceplane hangar, astronaut complex, vehicle assembly building. There's nothing here yet. This is actually a mission control building, which will probably be used more for single player, and a tracking station. You can also click on the launch pad and the runway. So you can, if you hold right click, you can scroll around and get different angles on it. You can also scroll to zoom in or out. And if you hold middle mouse or shift right click, Nope, just if you hold middle mouse, you can move around. We're going to the vehicle assembly building. You may be interested in, before building your first rocket, in trying out some of the default rockets. Probably the Kerbal X. And the Kerbal X is a pre-made rocket for you that has the possibility of getting you to the moon, if not just in orbit. And we'll explain all the different parts and everything in a moment. But for now, if you want to launch this, click the launch button. And we're going to go over some basic flight mechanics. Alright, so down in the right, in a second, these guys will load. And we have 3 Kerbals, and you probably have the same 3, because they're the default guys. If we go back, we can also assign other Kerbals to this rocket. So this over here is your staging. And I'll explain that in a second. Your throttle is located at the very bottom center on the left-hand side of the blue circle. To increase your throttle, you hold shift, and to decrease, you hold control. If you want to suddenly cut your throttle, X does that, and it will instantly shut off the throttle. On the right-hand side of the blue is the G-force meter, which you can mostly ignore. Below the blue ball is your heading in degrees on the horizon. This isn't your pitch, and that's the way you're pointing, basically. We're pointing at the sky, and that's generally how you want your rockets to start. For here, you notice we have 2 buttons per person, and we have IVA and EVA. IVA will take you inside to their view. You can scroll forward and back to zoom. If you tap right click, you'll be able to control the camera, and you can look out the windows and look at your other Kerbals. If you hold right click, it'll do the same thing, except when you, well, it'll do the same thing. So we're going to go over some of the gauges in the cockpit. I generally don't fly via the cockpit, but you're welcome to. This is your radar altitude, which is really good for landing. You don't have an equivalent to this on the outside view. And this is your actual above ground level indicator. These 3 are pointless. This atmosphere gauge, once you learn how to read the other gauges, it will be almost pointless. But basically, this is the thickest part of the atmosphere. This is the next thickest. This is thinner, and this is essentially no atmosphere. And once you're completely out of the atmosphere, the gauge will be all the way to the left. Coming over here, we have the vertical speed indicator, which tells you how fast you're going up or down. This is the altimeter, and you'll notice that we are at 0,000, which is the big one, which is the big clock thing, and we're not at, hold on, we're at 90 meters. So this is 100s, this is 1000s, and this is 10,000s. This is a lot less handy than this one, which just reads it for you. And if the units change, this will change, the red one, to like kilometers or megameters. Here we have some indicator lights. To toggle those, R toggles your RCS. You'll learn what that does in a second. T toggles your SAS. I'll also show you how to toggle that in a second. This is your throttle. You can click on it and move it as you want. It's also the shift and control keys. And you can double click on the windows, most of them. Some of the capsules you can't. And you can zoom in and out to look through them. So you can also, okay, you're wondering how I jump back and forth. The C key can jump you inside the rocket instead of having to click IVA. It'll jump you to the last Kerbal you IVA'd in. So EVA, this is internal, this is external. And you can hop a guy out and he'll probably fall off the ladder. Now these guys are really durable. And so he can walk around just using the WASD, and you can move your camera by holding right click or the arrow keys, as well as plus and minus on the numpad. Plus, minus. If you hold middle mouse and move your mouse around, that'll change your camera perspective, but it can only change so far. You can zoom quite a ways out until you're essentially at the map view. So right now, we should be map view material. M transitions to your map view and back. See, we can zoom in. There's a runway. If we come back in here, there's the runway. All right. Oops. So we have our guy, but we want to get back to the rocket. Find the bracket keys above enter and underneath backspace, and this will switch you back and forth, either of them. There's a certain order. I think it's by distance, but for right now, you can just use them in general. All right, so we've covered the map. Another way to get to the map is by clicking on this button, Orbit Map. And you can't see my mouse. So, we can right-click on fuel tanks to view how much fuel are in them. You'll learn what the fuel tanks are in a minute. And you'll notice your flag is flying here, and there are the same buildings you saw in the main screen. So if you want to mess around with flying, one of the first things you'll want to do is hit T. And see this SAS light comes on. SAS is stability control, essentially. And that'll help you keep your rocket pointed in the direction you want it. The next thing you'll want to do is throttle up. And the staging will determine the order which stuff happens. So, for example, these engines are down in this stage, and you can scroll over them and they'll highlight. You can also scroll over them on here and they'll highlight over here. And so what'll happen is the spacebar stages, and here's the number of stage I'm on. When I hit the spacebar, these engines will light up. Okay? When I hit the spacebar again, these are launch clamps and they'll fall away. When I hit the spacebar again, 2 of these pods will fall off the side because these are decouplers. When I hit it again, another 2 will fall off. And when I hit it again, another 2 will fall off. When I hit it once more, this decoupler will separate this rocket from this rocket. Underneath here is another engine. Right here. It's just has like a fairing over it to make it look nice. And then we have another decoupler and a parachute. Alright, so we're going to launch this. And this, I'm assuming, will be your first launch in Kerbal Space Program. Let's go over the controls before we actually launch. So normally we have WSAD, WASD, EQ. What this does, relative to this indicator, if you hold W, it's like an aircraft. You will point down. So this would come down to the north. So I'll show you in flight. Okay, you can see over here, pitch. On the bottom left corner of your screen, pitch. S pulls the pitch up. W pushes the pitch down. Yaw. A pushes it left. D pushes it right. And roll. E pushes it right. Q pushes it left. You can't stage when you're messing with stuff over here because you can actually change the order of things happening in case something goes wrong. To add a stage, you hit the plus. To get rid of one, you hit the minus. So I'm actually going to take these launch clamps and have them decouple when my engines ignite. Are we ready? I just hit space. So now you might notice the rocket's wobbling a little bit, and you're going pretty fast. Over here, we have your fuel indicators on the staging on the left, and you'll notice these 2 engines are running out of fuel. They're out of fuel, so they stop. So you want to stage. Again, we'll wait for these engines to run out of fuel, and we're going to stage. So if I hit the W key right now, I will point down towards the north. Stage again. If I hold the S key, we will point up towards south. Now I'm going to put the W key and now the S key, and D points it towards 90. A points it towards 270. Now if I rolled, stage again, if I rolled, this would change. So W would point me towards 270. It's all relative to this indicator here. So we're just going to try and get to space with this. We're not going to establish an orbit or anything, because that's a little more advanced. Up here, we have the lights, the brakes. You won't need brakes. Gear, right now, are triggered to these. I'll show you how to make it trigger other things later. And the lights don't do anything because we don't have lights. You notice this one has a lot more fuel than the previous stages. And that's because of what we call asparagus staging, and we'll get into that. It's maybe a little much for you at the start, but I'm trying to make this as easy as possible. So we can roll with the E key, and we can also roll with the Q key. And to stop rolling, you just hit the opposite key. Okay, we can also throttle down with Control, throttle up with Shift, and cut our throttle with X. IVA, or the C key. I'm hitting the C key. EVA, once we're in space, I'll show you what you can do with that. We're just basically pointing straight up and going. And you'll notice there's a velocity indicator here, and also our altitude is going up. This abort button probably won't do anything, but I can't guarantee it because I didn't set up this rocket. Over here we have time warp. This is important because if you use time warp, you'll be able to speed up time, but sometimes it's at the cost of physics calculations, and I'll get into that in a minute. Right now we're going really fast, and if you hit your map view, you can see we're probably way into space. That's 461,000 meters, so 461 kilometers. This is your apoapsis, which means the highest point in your orbit around a body. If I burned rocket fuel out here so that we had it going around the planet, the lowest point would be called the periapsis. So we are going to stage once more, and now we're going to activate this rocket after we throttle down. So, EVA, we're going to hit the button, and the guy's going to pop out. You'll notice F to grab, and he can grab this ladder here. Space, we'll let go, and you can just grab on again. And to get back in, you walk up to this door here and hit F. Also, if you get out of the command pod and get away from it, here, hold on, I didn't explain that very well. So once you're on here, hit the space bar and hit the R key. And your guy has a little jetpack on him, and he can fly around. If you right click on him, it'll show how much fuel he has. Shift goes up, Control goes down, and WSADEQ. So this is D, this is A, this is E, this is Q, this W is forward, and S is backward. R also puts the jetpack away. The jetpack can also be handy on lower gravity bodies like the moon. So we're going to hit F to climb on and hit F to board again. Alright, so that was EVA. Now, we are going to let this fall back to the... Well, actually, you know what? No, we are going to establish your first orbit. And then we'll learn how to build a rocket that can do it on your own. So, same controls still. And you can also just mess around a little bit and move around. You can look at how many resources you have. If you click on this resources tab up here, you can also scroll over and see where it's getting those numbers from. The electric charge will be used by the SAS, which is the stability control, because it basically spins little gyros around in the command pod to keep you steady. So you can actually shut off SAS, but it won't stabilize you. So let's go over. You also notice the rocket's wiggling a little bit, and that's completely normal. So we're going to go over to our 90. Find 90 on the horizon. The horizon is where the blue meets the brown. And go to your map. And once you get within maybe 30 seconds of this, the T-minus 30, so T-minus 30, we're going to burn. So we want to get there faster. This is where time warp comes into play. Right now we're out of the atmosphere, so we can use really fast time warp levels. So you can come up here in the upper left, and click once, and that'll speed up time by 5 times. You'll notice that if you start rotating and then you time warp, the rotation stops. That's because of the system they have set up to deal with time warp. There's also a hotkey for this. That is the less than and greater than signs. Less than slows down time warp, and greater than speeds up time warp. So now we'll wait till our highest point in our orbit, which is our apoapsis. So we want to figure out how much fuel we're going to burn at our apoapsis. And I feel like I'm going a little fast, but hang with me, guys. So we're going to see how there's that little blue ball that I can move around. We're going to click on it, right? And we can add a maneuver. So these are your different directions that you can burn. This is up. Well, this is in the direction of the velocity where you're traveling. This is to the left of the velocity. This is to the right. This is up. This is down. So this would be north, south. This would be towards Kerbin, away from Kerbin. And this would be east, west. Right now, how we're heading. So we are already heading. You'll notice we're coming up this way, around like that. And so we'll want to burn this way. East. And we want to burn. So you can hold right click and move your view around and also zoom. And we want to burn until we have this thing, a periapsis. Now the important thing about having a periapsis is it's above the atmosphere. And the atmosphere ends at 70 kilometers. So anything above 70 kilometers is good. Alright, so we have that set up. Now we want to look down at our nav ball and zoom around and move your spaceship around until we're at this blue marker. This blue marker shows us where we need to burn in order to do this maneuver here. There's also an estimated burn number, which a lot of times you can ignore because a lot of times it's wrong. And I'd recommend starting this burn about 1 minute, T-minus 1 minute. We have to change our velocity by 1,508.8 meters per second in order to get a stable orbit. So I'm going to start the engine, and we're going to burn. And hopefully we won't run out of fuel. So now you'll notice that it's holding really stable, and our estimated burn has changed, and now this is more accurate. So it will take us 1 minute 28 seconds to do this burn. If you have a maneuver that is long, more than say 30 seconds, what you'll want to do is start halfway before. So for example, if it's a 1 minute burn, you want to start 30 seconds at T-minus 30 for the node. Unless you're like imminently crashing. And that's because this maneuver thinks that you're going to magically get speed out of nowhere all at the same time. Whereas it actually takes time to change our velocity. This is a good time to learn delta V. Delta V is a mathematical term for change in velocity. It's also used in physics. And if you have... So this is how much velocity, how much we have to change our velocity by to get a stable orbit from the point we're at now. For this maneuver, because we set it up that way. So we can watch it. The blue line is our current and the yellows are projected. And you might notice that you might be coming off the blue marker a little bit. That's okay. Just move your indicator onto it. And you'll notice we have a periapsis. And if you overburn, this number will go back up because it wants you to do it exactly. But you don't have to be concerned with that as long as your periapsis is above 70 kilometers. So now you're in orbit. It's not very round. It's a little elliptical. But it's good enough for now. So we're going to bring these guys back. And then we're going to build our first rocket. So we're going to zoom around the planet using the time warp. And it'll limit you to how fast you can go. So you can try out different speeds, but you'll notice cannot warp faster than 100 times while below 240,000. Okay? So that's normal. So we're going to come around to our apoapsis. And when we get there, we're going to burn opposite of the direction we're going. So we could set up a maneuver node, but you just want to be about here and take your rocket and point it at the yellow circle with an X through it. That's retrograde, or opposite the direction you're going in. The one that doesn't have an X through it is prograde, and that's the way you're going. So if you want to speed up, you go prograde, slow down, you go retrograde. So we're going to light our engine, and you'll notice that the periapsis is coming down. And we're just going to burn most of the rest of our fuel. Until... Okay, so the Space Center on Kerbin is on this kind of Africa-looking continent, about where Bob is. But the planet will rotate some while we're up here, so we're going to put it a bit to the right, so right about where... right about there. So we still have some fuel left, but we'll be okay. So another thing I'm going to show you is how to save and load in-game. So if you're about to do something dangerous, you probably want to hit F5. And I'm going to get rid of the resources. F5 will show this little thing up here called quick saving. So you can do anything you want after you quick save, except for quick save again. And if you hold F9, it'll load back and you'll be where you left off. That's really handy if you're about to do something dangerous. It's important to note that as we come in the atmosphere, Kerbal Space Program doesn't have an actual like heat system yet. It has pretty lighting when we come through the atmosphere, like fireballs and stuff, but it doesn't actually calculate heat, so we don't have to worry about that yet. If we did, we'd have to change a lot of the stuff we're doing on the way down. So now that we're set, we're going to detach it, and we're going to wait to fire off the next stage, which is the parachute. We're going to time warp and come in the atmosphere. So we may have overshot a little bit. Alright, so about once you get in the atmosphere, you could have fired the parachute at any time, but once you get in the atmosphere, I recommend you fire your parachute and nothing will happen initially. You can disengage SAS, and you'll notice that this wants to rotate, so pointing the aerodynamic side down. So this is actually more aerodynamic than the other side. And now the effects start to kick in. And you'll see your parachute is out, and you're slowing down a lot. You can double click on icons to get to mark them as a target. So as you come down, you want to switch from orbit to surface, and you can click this indicator above your nav ball and change it from target to orbit to surface. Or if you don't have a target set, it'll go straight from orbit to surface. So let's unset that target. Alright, so we want to go surface. Now explain the difference next video. So you'll notice our velocity is slowing down. That's good. Generally, the parachute's going to deploy 500 meters, but we're above land, so it's going to deploy 500 meters above the land. And you'll notice we're coming down nice and fine, and we have a parachute out. Now we can engage what's called physics warp. And this tries to speed up the game engine, essentially, instead of just taking shortcuts. So we're going to use our arrow keys, and you'll notice the time indicator is green. If it's having trouble, it'll go yellow, and if it's having a lot of trouble, it'll go red. Generally, you want to keep it green or yellow. So now we hit the ground, and they're back. And they're only, if you look at your launch debris, you can scroll over it, they're only 45 kilometers away from the Space Center. So you'll want the pilots back. So we're going to hit Escape and Space Center. Now, we're going to go in the tracking station and recover them, so that we can have our pilots back. So we're going to go to Kerbal X. We can click on it from here or in the list on the left. And we're going to click the recover button. And yes, we do want to recover it. We're also going to recover Bob. So that completes your first orbit and some basic flight mechanics. And next time we're going to learn how to build a rocket. Thanks for watching. This has been